Russia has declared war on Ukraine. As soon as the declaration... Oh, that's a missile. That's a missile. That's a missile.
That was one of those like...
Holy...
So in that video, you have a reporter being shocked by a specific missile flying overhead, sort of mirroring how I think many people processed the news of last night. If you were like me, you were on Twitter and you realized, oh, it's happening. It's happening now. This thing that we apparently now with hindsight have been building towards for weeks, and also the groundwork of it for years at this point. But it has happened. The invasion of Ukraine, beyond just declaring the independence of a couple of disputed territories and promising to send in peacekeeping forces. No, missiles were sent in, bombs were sent in, helicopters, tanks, and troops were sent in. We're gonna have more footage as well as more details. But Jeff, tell me a little bit about your reaction as this was developing.
Well, I mean, first, let me just say that I want to have solidarity with the Ukrainian people that are stuck in the middle of this. Look, I'm going to say that I was originally quite skeptical that this is actually going to happen. And then when it happened, it's like, oh, so that happened. It was real. Oh, no. And look, let me just ask you a quick question here. When you heard about this, and I should say to the lead up of this, were you also a bit skeptical? I mean, reports coming out of like the State Department and things like that, and knowing the United States' propensity for this rhetoric, especially when we talk about going back to 2016 and how it's been Russia, 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 Russia. It's kind of like the boy who cried wolf. And then suddenly in Ukraine, the wolf showed up. And so it was kind of a shock to a lot of us, I think, on the left, that like we vastly underestimated Putin's, mindset when it came to invading Ukraine, and that he had actually had this plan for what seems to be quite some time.
Yeah, exactly, and might potentially have plans beyond that, which we'll turn to shortly. I will say, I did not expect that an all-out invasion would actually happen. I was pretty clear about that. I've also been much more importantly clear that I am by no means an expert on Ukraine or Eastern Europe. There are areas that I think I have a good amount of knowledge in. This is not one of them. That said, it might be that I didn't buy it as much, but for different reasons than you, potentially, or and I don't want to misconstrue what you're saying there. I didn't think it would happen because it would be so significant and potentially economically damaging, as well as damaging in terms of the international relationship of Russia. It wasn't that I didn't think it was going to happen necessarily specifically because I didn't trust what Biden or the State Department was saying. Obviously, you should not necessarily trust what the president, the State Department, the CIA, or anything says, especially in matters of war. But it was a little bit harder for me to totally discount what they were saying when, at least in this case, there were well over 100,000 troops that had been moved to a border. That is a little bit harder to totally discount than, no, we've got a photo, and I swear under this little gray bump, there's a nuclear weapon. It's a little bit more real. That said, I didn't think it would happen. And now it is happening, and it is real. As you said, solidarity with the Ukrainian people, some of which have already died. Families have lost people. They're saying at least 40 soldiers killed. I'm going to throw out another prediction that hopefully will turn out to be as wrong as all of my others, that when you bomb multiple airports, military bases, like you did not kill just 40 people. So that number is almost certainly going to go up. In terms of civilian deaths, I know that people have been fleeing from the city centers. There was a massive traffic jam moving out of the capital of Kiev last night. And it is very real. It is something that we get to debate and that others get to debate in an even stupider and griftier way. But it is real for those people, those who have already died, those who will die, those who right now are terrified about the future of their country.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of reports of the runs on gas stations and supplies for people that are trying to flee towards more towards NATO, basically the borders of the NATO countries. And so it always, speaking of some of the people who I guess didn't quite buy that this was going to happen, and they were saying like, well, or even were supporting Putin's move. And we've certainly seen some of that from some of the bad hot takes on Twitter, especially. But okay, so they're going into a place where they say, well, we don't like NATO on our borders. You're going to go invade a country that's even closer to NATO. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Weird. Very strange.
Well,
again, it suggests to me that this was in planning for quite some time, and that it really wasn't.
Yeah.
That argument doesn't seem to hold a lot of water.
Yeah, or at the very least, I've been saying for a long time, it can't be the entirety of it. It can be a component potentially. I don't think that is the wholly genuine account of why Vladimir Putin wanted to do this. In any event, as we've been saying, we want to make sure that you understand this is real. So I want to play a little bit more video footage. There's a lot going around. I am trying to restrict ourselves to stuff that seems very carefully vetted as being true in days like this. Misinformation, including video misinformation, is rife. So tread carefully. But that said, here's a little bit more footage.
Вже штук 20 пролетіло. Не видно українського герба. Точно російські. Прямо над хатами. Прямо ось над хатами літають, падли. Полетіли в сторону аеропорта. Бомблять аеропорт. Чути, що йде бій. Вже штук 30 нарахував точно.
Okay, so there's a lot of footage of explosions from last night, missiles flying overhead, troop movements, as well as wreckage on the ground and everything. We do want to zoom out just a little bit. I want to show you a map. It's one of the better maps that I've seen to give an idea of the scale of this. This is not simply an invasion of eastern Ukraine. They have hit a variety of points effectively over the entire geographic expanse of Ukraine, including some of the most heavily populated areas. I want to give you just a little bit of what Putin was saying at the time. He gave a speech timed seemingly specifically for when the first missiles would hit, saying that he is ordering troops into Ukraine, but made clear his target goes beyond this to America's, quote, empire of lies. And he threatened, quote, consequences you have never faced in your history for, quote, anyone who tries to interfere with us. He reminded the world, if we needed to be reminded, that they have one of the most powerful nuclear states, an arsenal of obviously thousands of nuclear weapons of a variety of types. And they have a certain advantage in several cutting edge weapons, which could just be generalized bragging about the fact that they have thousands of nukes or some reference to hypersonic nuclear ICBMs or something like that. In any event, he said that there should be no doubt that any potential aggressor will face defeat and ominous consequences should it directly attack our country. So generalized threats specifically about the potential deployment of nuclear weapons. So yes, Jeff, things have escalated quite a bit throughout this week.
Yeah, I look at that video and that is dystopian. I mean, that is everything essentially that we have feared from this potential conflict turning into an actual conflict. And going back and referencing that map, you're right. It's not in just the Donetsk and Luhansk regions that they declared to be independent states. No, they're attacking a sovereign state. The rest of the country is under assault.
Yeah.
And it really is just a horrible, terrifying situation, especially once again, going back to the people of Ukraine who are suffering under this. It really is a terrible situation. And going back to the threats that Putin is making, I mean, I could think of part of that is especially like, we're going to make bellicose threats, as most, I think, world leaders generally do. You can only go back to the kind of threats that Donald Trump would make. My button's bigger than your button. Not quite as, I don't quite know the word that I'm looking for on that, but much more of a measured response from Putin than Trump. But then you can also go back to things that George W. Bush, Obama with the red lines, and so you can expect a little bit of bellicose rhetoric. But at the same time, that is scary because there is the threats of nuclear war, and that is the thing that can basically destroy humanity several times over if there is a prolonged nuclear exchange. And I'm not saying that that's definitely going to happen or has a big chance of happening, but any even a small little chance. Look, I love playing the game Fallout. I don't want to live in it. If there's a 1% chance of that happening, I'm not at all interested.
Yeah, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in modern warfare. I'm not interested in any of this, obviously.
No Call of Duty.
Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't interested when Trump was promising fire and fury and everything. I am not interested in disconnected, like insane billionaires gambling with our lives as the currency, just so that they can feel powerful. And don't like it when it's Trump, don't like it when it's Putin. Feel some sort of obligation to be against both of those, actually. And Obama as well, and George W. Bush, and Bill Clinton. If you're against war, if you're against imperialism, you should be against all of it and not have like a little star and then maybe references to specifically where it applies. No, all of it actually.
Yeah, no asterisks here.
Exactly. Biden, who will be speaking later on today, responded in real time saying Mr. Putin had chosen a premeditated war that will bring a catastrophic loss of life and human suffering. He has made clear, as he did prior to this, that no American troops will be sent to Ukraine. His European allies have taken the same position, so that has been the message from the beginning. They are not sending troops in. In any event, I do want to let you know about a few things that have been developing before we went live, including news of Ukrainian forces battling Russian forces in Chernobyl. They are saying there's concern about the possible breach of the dome that has sealed in the material there. Again, these are the sorts of things that in the literal heat of battle, who knows how accurate that is. Another thing to potentially be worried about. There are also protests going on inside Russia against the war. One reporter, a Moscow reporter, said there were over 1,000 people at an anti-war protest. I saw other reports, although again, do not consider these confirmed in the first day of a war, that over 400 people at those Russian protests had been hauled away and arrested. So bear that in mind. Also reports of Poland letting in Ukrainians without documents. Again, do not consider any of these massively confirmed at this point. But in any event, we're all just trying to catch up, trying to understand what is happening, where this is likely to go. Because of Vladimir Putin, who can move from one day of peacekeeping forces will be deployed to bombing the presidential mansion and invading, God only knows what next week could bring. Any other thoughts?
Absolutely. Yeah, let me just go back to peacekeeping. I love how they call them peacekeeping forces. Has peacekeeping forces ever been not a euphemism for just normal soldiers? Because it seems to be whenever they're in somewhere to so-called keep the peace, they never seem to keep the peace. Very strange.
Yeah, I noticed that pattern. Someone in the chat is saying, according to CNN, Chernobyl has been seized by Russian troops. So take that for what it's worth. Thank you.
Yeah, and let me just add one more thing too on the Russian protest. That's really good to see. Actually, I saw the videos of that, and again, grain of salt, but on how widespread that they are. But if there's enough people that are openly defying Vladimir Putin, it kind of shows that maybe there's a spark of hope here, and that the Russian people have as much of a distaste in having a war in Ukraine as the American people. Because you look at some of the polls, very few Americans want any sort of war in Ukraine, especially for us to be able to get involved. And so I take that as a good sign of just the war weariness of the world. Been through too much, too many wars, too many conflicts. And I'm hoping maybe that some of that pressure might get to Vladimir Putin. Again, assuming he's a rational actor, which again, that's in doubt now. But I am hoping that there is some impact, some effect by seeing maybe not just isolated protests, but seeing a more anti-war organic protest movement growing in Russia and in other.
I hope that you're right. I don't necessarily believe that might end up being very optimistic, but you know what? Today, I'll take some optimism.
We need it.
Oh, especially with how some have, been effectively like laying the groundwork for this, apologizing in advance of an invasion. But anyway, the reaction. I want everyone to be ready for what you're about to see coming out of the media about this, because things are going to get wild. Check
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.